Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today we're looking at an affordable 1440p gaming monitor from MSI, their new G274QPF-QD, which is set to hit the market shortly. This displays a lower cost version of their highly popular MSI G274QF-QD that we checked out a few years back. MSI told me it should come in around 60% of the older model's price, giving it an MSRP in Australia of just $470, which should equate to around $300 US, which would be a great price. Like the MAG variant we had earlier, this new G274 is equipped with a 27-inch 2560 by 1440 IPS panel with quantum dot technology, enhancing the backlight and giving it a wider color gamut. It's not the same panel, it'd be difficult to hit this price point were that the case, but it's similar and actually comes with a slightly higher refresh rate of 170Hz. There's also the usual adaptive sync features including G-Sync compatible branding, as well as display HDR 400, though there's no real HDR hardware here. The big question is whether this new model manages to deliver the same or similar performance to the older MAG, because if it can, it's going to be a very compelling option for mainstream gamers looking to make the upgrade to 1440p medium refresh. We'll find out shortly whether they have succeeded, but before we do, today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, the quick and easy to use VPN service that I've personally been using for many years now. NordVPN is great for me when I'm traveling abroad to places like Computex and I still want to watch my team play Australian rules football. I just load up the app, select Australia, and I can stream matches at great speeds using my existing account. It's also amazing for getting the best deals while traveling. Sometimes you have to be in a certain country to get the cheapest flights or car rentals. NordVPN makes that very easy. Even researching stuff for these videos is assisted by NordVPN, as the best way to gather pricing information in regions like Europe for me is to tunnel in and appear like a local. It gives you localized search results and it tends to be faster as well. If you're interested, go to nordvpn.com/monitorsunboxed to get the 2-year plan with an exclusive deal plus 1 bonus month free. It's risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/monitorsunboxed. So, the design. MSI have opted for something basic yet functional. Almost all of the exterior surfaces are standard black plastic, which looks fine at this price point. There's no RGB LED lighting, something usually seen with MSI's higher end products, and the rear of the display is more on the basic end of the scale with fewer gamer design elements. I think it looks fine, it's functional, it just lacks that bit of premium touch you see with more expensive monitors. What I was really pleased to see is a wide range of ergonomic adjustments supported with the stand. We get height, tilt, swivel, and pivot support. The maximum height is decent, and the ability to pivot it into a portrait orientation will be useful for people that are thinking of this as a secondary monitor. Port selection is okay, with one DisplayPort 1.4, 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, and USB Type-C with DP Alt mode. To enable 170Hz, you have to select the DP overclocking mode in the OSD. Natively, the panel runs at 165Hz, but I had no issues using the OC feature. Unfortunately, as the display does not use HDMI 2.1, the HDMI ports are limited to just 144Hz, though this is sufficient to use with game consoles that typically limit 1440p output to 120Hz. The USB-C port only supports 15 watts of power output, and there's no KVM switch, something that's becoming popular among gaming monitors. Other OSD features are reasonable though, all controlled through a directional toggle. There's crosshairs, a timer, FPS display, and shadow boosting controls, plus a good range of color controls and picture-in-picture support. Nothing especially groundbreaking, just a solid feature set like we've come to expect in this price tier. Response time performance is key here because one of the main reasons to get the MSI G274QPF-QD was its decent speed in conjunction with excellent color performance. So let's dive into the G274 model and look at its 3 overdrive options, starting with the normal mode. When looking at 170Hz performance, this mode is rather slow, offering just a 10 millisecond response time, though admittedly there is no overshoot. Still, cumulative deviation above 500 is not what we're looking for when testing the highest refresh rate. The fast mode presents interesting performance, increasing speed quite a bit to an average of 4.7 milliseconds. The overshoot has increased for close transitions, leading to an overall average error of 12% and an inverse ghosting rate of 28%. In practice, overshoot is not very noticeable during gameplay under these conditions, and with superior cumulative deviation to the normal mode, this is what I'd recommend at 170Hz. In contrast, when we move to the fastest setting, there is clearly far too much overshoot to make this mode usable. The fast mode is generally good for gaming at the higher end of the refresh rate range, at or above 120Hz. With that said, at 120Hz we see nearly 50% of transitions exhibiting inverse ghosting, which is visible in practice to a small degree. Some people may want to drop the setting down from fast to normal at this refresh rate. At refreshes below 120Hz though, it's obvious that the fast mode is too aggressive with its tuning, causing high overshoot and plenty of inverse ghosting. It's especially noticeable at 60Hz, which has high cumulative deviation. For lower refresh rate gaming, the only alternative is the normal mode, which as we saw earlier is too slow for 170Hz gaming. Even at 120Hz it's not ideal, but does reduce overshoot artifacts as this is effectively overdrive disabled. At anything below 100Hz I'd definitely recommend the normal setting, and I'd also recommend normal for general adaptive sync gamers expecting to utilize the entire refresh rate range that don't want to change settings. Unfortunately, the end result is that the G274QPF-QD does not have a single overdrive mode experience. At around 120Hz, there's a crossover point where the fast mode is suitable for higher refresh rates and the normal mode for lower refresh rates, but no one mode delivers the best experience across the entire range. This is in contrast to the previous MAG model that did have a single overdrive mode experience, but it isn't unusual for more budget-oriented monitors to fall short. Most competitors around this price point have similar issues. Speaking of competitors, let's take a look at our comparison charts, starting with the best performance at the highest refresh rate. Around this mark, the G274QPF-QD does a pretty decent job, delivering similar response times to the M27QP, Pixio PX277 Pro, and the NX EDG27X. With overshoot on the higher side, it's not as well tuned as the LG 27GP83B, but it outperforms other monitors like the X27Q and original M27Q. It's also faster than the MAG model, but with higher overshoot, so it's a bit of a wash. Average performance across the entire refresh rate range is where the MSI model is considerably less impressive, as it lacks a single overdrive mode experience. While the normal mode does deliver no overshoot, it's relatively slow by 2023 standards and clearly slower than its excellent predecessor. The alternate option in the fast mode offers a 4.5 millisecond response average, but with an inverse ghosting rate of 48%, which would be clearly the worst overshoot result in this chart. While the G274QPF-QD does fail to reach the heights of the MAG model and other more premium products like the 27GP83B and M27QX, it offers a similar experience to other budget monitors. It's quite similar to the Gigabyte M27QP we previously recommended as an example. When looking at cumulative deviation, we get a better idea of how the balance between response times and overshoot plays out. This new MSI model with its slowish but zero overshoot experience isn't the worst, sitting inside the usual 500 to 600 range we see from modern IPS. Crucially, it is slightly better than the M27QP overall, around 7% better, and superior to the HP X27Q to the tune of 17%. It also ends up only 10% behind the MAG 274QF-QD, so while the older and more expensive MAG is definitely better, the margins are narrow and it's hard to call the G274 a bad offering. It's not amazing, but it's fine. The G274 performs typically at 120Hz. Here we're using the normal mode to avoid overshoot, with similar compromises needed for the M27QP. Obviously, this performance could be better and other products do offer that, usually at a higher price. Similar story at 60Hz. Now there is a much wider range of monitors that require low overdrive settings. There are a couple of standouts here, but in the more budget category, we're mostly looking at 9 to 11 millisecond experiences to avoid inverse ghosting. Input latency, well, it's normal. We're looking at a sub 1 millisecond processing delay and typical contributions from refresh rate and response times. At just 170Hz, it's not an overly fast monitor in terms of refresh rate and input lag. 240Hz is more optimal for fast competitive gaming, though that sort of refresh isn't available at this price unless you want to put up with something like 1080p. Power consumption is also pretty much as expected here, a mid-table result that's relatively efficient and actually consumes somewhat less power than its predecessor. Backlight strobing is supported on this monitor, but unfortunately it's just a regular MPRT mode, not the MPRT sync mode MSI has used for other products. This means enabling strobing will disable adaptive sync, and there's no other controls to optimize strobe timing or length. Furthermore, strobing is not supported at 60Hz. The minimum I could get it to run was 75Hz, and the results there were terrible. But for use at 170Hz, the backlight strobing mode is okay to mediocre. In the middle of the screen there was faint strobe crosstalk presenting as a double image, with a more pronounced double image at the top and bottom of the display. As this panel uses a quantum dot enhanced backlight instead of a KSF backlight to achieve a wide gamut, there's no slow red phosphor and therefore no red fringing in the strobing mode, which is good to see. But I think the benefits of the strobing mode are limited, and it's not something I'd consider using most of the time. One of the benefits to using a quantum dot panel is its wide color gamut. The G274 supports 98% of the DCI-P3 color space as well as 94% coverage of Adobe RGB. This particular QD panel doesn't extend as far into the greens as others, limiting that Adobe RGB coverage a bit compared to, say, the MAG model, which offers 100% coverage, but it's still better than other P3 only wide gamut monitors. Overall, this display has 81% Rec 2020 coverage, which is very decent and one of the wider color gamuts that I've tested. While having such a wide color gamut is awesome for creators that need access to colors beyond the usual Rec 709, there are some drawbacks for everyday users. One is that by default, the monitor's color gamut is unclamped, meaning that when viewing SDR content like YouTube videos, the small SDR color space is expanded to fill the entire wide gamut. This causes oversaturation, which is quite noticeable on this display. Delta E averages are poor for SDR content, and most skin tones are redder than what is natural. Grayscale performance was reasonable though, aside from an incorrect gamma. Compared to other monitors, default calibration is about where we'd expect, which is to say a mid-table result for color checker and above average for grayscale. In both instances, the new model is slightly better calibrated than its predecessor. While the default experience is oversaturation, MSI do include 3 color modes that restrict the gamut to sRGB, P3 and Adobe RGB depending on which mode you choose. The sRGB mode is best for regular everyday SDR usage like web browsing, watching YouTube videos or gaming. It offers similar grayscale performance to the default mode, but a clamped gamut that eliminates oversaturation. Delta E's are much better here, though not perfect. So overall I'd say the sRGB mode offers average calibration among gaming monitors, and you'll get similar performance for the P3 and Adobe RGB modes. I'd certainly recommend using the sRGB mode on this monitor, but it's not really possible to further tune its performance as MSI locks settings such as white balance. The only way to improve accuracy further is through a full calibration, which we performed using CalMan. As the monitor's gamut is very wide, the G274QPF-QD is easy to calibrate, and the results are generally good across several color spaces. However, software calibration has its limits, as these profiles only work in supported applications. Maximum brightness is good at 433 nits, which in combination with the matte anti-glare coating will be plenty for most users, and a minor increase on the old MAG model. Minimum brightness was disappointing though, bottoming out at just 78 nits, which may be too bright for those that really crave a dim monitor for nighttime usage. Another lackluster area to performance was the contrast ratio. While not a deal breaker, after calibration I only recorded a contrast ratio of 936:1, which is below its rated 1000:1 ratio and a bit below average for an IPS. Again, it's not too dissimilar from other budget monitors like the M27QP and X27Q, but it is a 13% lower result than the MAG and other more premium 1440p IPS monitors. Contrast is also terrible relative to VA panels and OLEDs. Viewing angles are good, no complaints there. Uniformity was not amazing though. I didn't have any huge issues with IPS glow, but brightness uniformity was average at best. Probably a bit below average for a gaming monitor these days. Usable for sure, and uniformity can be unit dependent, so your mileage may vary. Final section of the review is the Hub Essentials checklist, which looks to see whether MSI are accurately advertising their monitor and whether it meets basic performance standards. In the first section, the lack of HDMI 2.1 means the monitor cannot be run at its full 170Hz over HDMI, so that gets a penalty. I gave a borderline result for bezel size as well. While most of the images on MSI's website show the correct bezel size, there are some images further down the page that suggest a much slimmer bezel, which is misleading. The color performance section is largely accurate, with MSI considerably underselling the brightness capabilities with just a 300 nit typical rating. It performs more over the 400 nit mark, but on the flip side, contrast is lower than reported. It's also good to see MSI not advertising factory calibration when the monitor doesn't really have that. As for motion performance, I think the 1 millisecond gray to gray result is misleading, as that's only achievable with unusable settings and only in the best cases, with a borderline best case result with usable settings. Then for HDR performance, unsurprisingly, this is a fake HDR monitor with no local dimming support, a terrible contrast ratio and inadequate brightness. Use of display HDR 400 branding is misleading, as this suggests HDR capabilities when really this is just an SDR monitor, but there were no issues with subpixel structure, flickering, or pixel inversion here. Overall, the MSI G274QPF-QD is a reasonable mainstream 1440p gaming monitor. It's not going to blow you away with its performance, but what it offers is similar to other displays in this budget category, with a few positives and negatives depending on what you're after. The biggest selling point here is the use of a quantum dot enhanced backlight, which is relatively uncommon among cheaper gaming monitors. So if you love a wide color gamut, you want heaps of saturation, or you need some wide gamut capabilities for your productivity work, then this display is a good affordable option. MSI complements this with the inclusion of sRGB, P3 and Adobe RGB modes, all of which offer good gamut clamping and reasonable calibration. Other areas to performance trade blows with other mainstream 1440p monitors I've recently tested. Motion performance isn't amazing, with mediocre tuning and a lack of a single overdrive mode experience, but it reported similar results to other monitors around this price point, and it's far from the worst IPS LCD I've tested. Contrast is fairly weak, though again similar to its competitors, while brightness is good and stand ergonomics are excellent. There's also no major flaws or defects here, so you don't need to worry about flickering with variable refresh rate gaming. As far as being a successor to the MAG 274QRF-QD is concerned, well, the G274 model clearly isn't in the same league. Unfortunately, this is not simply a cheaper version of the MAG, it also features worse performance in areas like response times and contrast. I guess that is to be expected when it is considerably cheaper. What matters more is whether the G274 stacks up well against its immediate competition, and I think it does. It's very similar to the Gigabyte M27QP I've recommended previously, but with a wider color gamut. It's better than the HP X27Q, and I'd also buy it over the Pixio PX277 Pro. But I wouldn't say it's as strong or well-rounded as more premium 1440p 165Hz-ish monitors like the LG 27GP83B. So ultimately, my recommendation is going to hinge significantly on pricing in your region. Here in Australia, it's set for just a $470 MSRP compared to $570 for the M27QP, making it a great buy and a strong recommendation. In the US, I think this will be great value if it's priced around $300 US or less, which would be $50 cheaper than the M27QP currently. That's where I'd expect it to land based on the AU MSRP I was given. But also keep an eye out on pricing for products like the 27GP83B. If they go on sale to within $50 of this new MSI model, then they're definitely worth considering. And of course, the M27QP also does receive sales at times. So yeah, it's just going to be that usual pricing battle depending on which model makes the most sense in your region. Anyway, that's it for this review. If you do appreciate our independent monitor testing, then please do subscribe to the channel and give it a like if you enjoyed the video. We also have links in the description below to our Patreon and Floatplane accounts, which will give you access to things like our ICC profiles that we generate for these reviews, our Discord chat as well, where you can chat about the latest in monitors. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.